sounds like a guy that's gonna have revenge.
And I told him it was a matter of principle with me that I couldn't go on working with my boys feeling I had sold them down the river to him on his say-so.
No, he sold us down the river with this fantasy globe.
In part to escape from the strains of union negotiations, Walt accepted an invitation from the American government to take a goodwill tour of Latin America.
If you haven't caught on by now, the government sure is involved with Disney every part of the way.
At the studio, work continued on another production, Dumbo.
Just another one of their... Look! Hot diggity! You're flying! You're flying!
Dumbo was originally scheduled to appear on the cover of Time magazine in early December of 1941.
And here we go with December again. Always remember they do it near that time of year.
But was overtaken by an entirely different story.
A date which will live in infamy.
I was at home and we got the word on that they bombed Pearl Harbor. That shortly after that, I got a call from the studio manager, and he had been called in turn by the police. He said, Walt, the Army's moving in on us, and came up and said they wanted to move in. And I said, I'd have to call you, and they said, call them, but we're moving in anyway. So 500 troops moved in the studio.
This just adds more evidence to that Pearl Harbor was staged because they were there at Disney Studios.
Meanwhile, the studio retooled to produce training and propaganda films.
Wonder how many people know this, that they were used for that.
Walt, I always felt more or less lost control in a sense, because we had so many of the Army brass was there at the studio, and all of them had aspirations of being a producer and whatnot. So it became a kind of a puzzling time for him.
So the government really wants to direct movies. What for? Think about it.
Walt did not want to spoil his daughters, but on occasion he did have a special surprise for them.
The most exciting Christmas for us was the Playhouse Christmas. He was directing us, and he said, now go over to the mailbox. Now go to the gate, open the gate. Now go inside. Now open the door, open the top of the door, and look out. Lean out farther. Diane, lean out farther. And I fell on my face. And I'm relieved to see he dropped the camera immediately, because all I remember is when I came up crying with my bloody lip, he was still filming me.
Walt has been described as politically conservative, but through 1940, he primarily voted for Democrats.
And if you don't know about the color orange and Masons, you should go research that.
In fact, people who knew him well thought that in politics he was somewhat naive.
Naive? Oh no, I think that's a front.
Hollywood was a natural target for the politicians. That's the way they could make headlines. And so they would bring people before the House Un-American Activities Committee.
And this is where I think they used that event to instill their guys into Hollywood.
On October 24th, 1947, Walt followed Gary Cooper and Ronald Reagan in testifying for the congressional hearings.
Especially when you got the future president sitting right there. This is just too weird, isn't it?
And I feel that they really ought to be smoked out and shown up for what they are, so that all the good free causes in this country, all the liberalisms that really are American, can go out without this taint of communism.
It's definitely a turning point here that we need to research some more too.
One of the myths that grew out of the strike era was that Walt was anti-Semitic. When in 1955, B'nai B'rith wanted to give Walt its Man of the Year award.
Don't forget how the employees were back earlier in the film.
It researched the issue and found it to be quite untrue.
It was pure nonsense. I think that whole idea should be put to rest, and I think buried deep, because there's no validity there.
They're always covering up stuff, but if we dig, we'll find it.
It's slander. I think Walt was the most even dispositioned, even-minded human being I ever met. If a person is a nice person, he loved you. I don't care what your color, your race, your creed. That's the way he was. He didn't have any prejudice.
Just seeing a different face of his, it seems this man has nothing but many faces.
When the war ended, the studio had lost its way. Roy wanted to be financially conservative. Walt yearned for new adventures. They argued often. Finally, the brothers agreed to diversify and turned to live-action films.
Even seems that there was internal conflict between the brothers, you know.
Walt dispatched a couple, the Mulots, to Alaska to film wildlife. From miles of material, he personally crafted a storyline. The result was a half-hour feature called Seal Island.
Go take a look at Seal Island and the cover. It's flat earth mockery.
Walt Disney movies made a lot of money in England and the UK, but that money would have to remain in the UK and be spent there. I guess the thought process was, well, we have to make a film in England. What should we make there? That led them to a classic, Treasure Island.
It's more of tailoring the fantasy for the public.
As I'd sit there while they rode the merry-go-round, did all these things, sit on a bench, eating peanuts, I felt that there should be something built, some kind of an amusement enterprise built where that the parents and the children could have fun together.
Figuring out ways to entertain our mind, keep us busy.
There was a park in Copenhagen called Tivoli, and it struck Walt by being very, very clean, well-run, festive, little popcorn lights on all the buildings everywhere. A lot of the things that sort of came back into Disneyland, I think, also came from Tivoli.
That Roman resort town dates back to that Egyptian cult I talked about.
When we went through the Tivoli Gardens, he was making notes all the time. And I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm just making notes about something that I've always dreamed about, and that is someday having a great, great center of playgrounds for the children and the families of America.
The relationship of the amusement park dates right back to their sect from Egypt.
Over the years, the studio had become increasingly bureaucratic, less open to spontaneous ideas. In response, Walt created WED Enterprises for Walter Elias Disney.
And this is how they do it. They're going to split, create another company so we can't trace stuff.
WED was organized or developed so that Walt could incorporate his name. And then he in turn negotiated a contract with Walt Disney Productions to license the name and to derive royalties from the sale of character merchandising income.
WED would become the design center behind all the early plans and attractions for Disneyland.
So you can see it's a separate project with a different name.
While Walt was able to get the park started with his own money, he couldn't afford to actually build it. He saw the solution in television.
In television. But the other guys, as you're going to find out, are afraid of television for...
Your other producers, the rest of the Hollywood community was scared to death of television. They saw that if people sat home and watched TV for free, that would be an admission ticket not sold at the movie theater. So Walt really stood out.
So you see, this is the result of being a good boy for 30 years. Santa finally came across. See when you travel in there? See that thing? Right?
So someone was making money at that, or it was for some other reason.
Will it really do magic, Mr. Disney?
Oh, sure. I'm a little rusty, though. You try it.
Walt produced one more special, but he would not re-enter television for several years. Still, the possibilities never left his mind.
Do you girls know this character, Disney?
Yes. He's our father.
Oh.
Some things, you see it and it just creeps you out, eh?
In the beginning of 1954, ABC President Robert Kintner and Walt went on the air to announce their partnership, the development of a weekly show called Disneyland.
This new medium, and, well, I just want to assure you that we're not taking it lightly, that it's not going to be just a little stepchild of the Disney organization. It's going to be one of our major enterprises.
Sound like a amusement park owner or a politician.